Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Little Big Town called The Breaker. So it's been a running narrative and critic in-joke for years that Little Big Town shares a fair bit in common with Fleetwood Mac, or at least their progression suggests some similarities. Sure, they started off on the outskirts of country, blending in elements of pop and folk and rock, but in 2014 with Painkiller they took a hard left turn towards a sort of experimentation in melodic tones that ran through a lot of Tusk, and they got a significant amount of parallel critical acclaim for it. And in 2016, they did it again, ditching Jay Joyce's production for Pharrell's as they made the sunny pop record Wanderlust that seemed to reflect common tones with Fleetwood Mac's Mirages. And now it's about time we put that overdone comparison to bed for once and for all, because at this point of career parallels, Fleetwood Mac released Tango in the Night in 1987 in the midst of solo albums and cocaine abuse, and I'm not quite sure Little Big Town are doing much of either, at least not as far as I know. In fact, the buzz I heard was suggesting that Little Big Town were at least trying to pivot back towards country tones, reuniting with Jay Joyce on production and recruiting veteran country songwriters like Natalie Hemby and Lori McKenna in order to help. And to me, that was a really good sign. Not just because I want to avoid the implosion here, but Jay Joyce has steadily become a more subtle and nuanced producer. And there were at least traces of interesting ideas on Painkiller that I'd love to see develop further, especially if the writing could actually step up and match it. I wasn't gonna say I had high hopes for The Breaker. I was lukewarm on the lead-off single Better Man, which was contributed by Taylor Swift of all people. But you know what? I still go back to cuts like Live Forever and Tumble and Fall off of Painkiller, and if they got all that awful pop impulse out of their system on Wanderlust, which was thankfully ignored by anybody with good taste, this album, could it be good? Okay, how is Little Big Town's return with The Breaker? Well, here's the thing. I've gone over this record a fair few times, and if you were looking for a return to form for Little Big Town, this is definitely a step in the right direction. But at the same time, it kind of frustrates me immensely because this is an album that has some excellent songs interspaced between too many ideas that are just poorly executed. And these songs aren't so much bad as they are experiments that just didn't really stick the landing. I hate to say it, but despite all of Little Big Town's aspersions to be more experimental, to be more like Fleetwood Mac, they stick the landing the best when they make just straightforward pop country songs. Sometimes it's good to focus on what you do well. Not everybody could be Sturgill Simpson. And while this is definitely a step in the right direction, it is a good album. It's one that takes way too many detours. In other words, not a great album. And here's the thing. The fundamentals of Little Big Town, they're still promising. When their vocal harmonic arrangements are on point, they sound fantastic. And while I still wish they'd opt for songwriting that actually incorporates interplay between the four singers, they do have pretty good chemistry. They're veterans at it at this point. And yet, what continues to frustrate me is that, once again, Karen Fairchild takes the lead on half of the songs. And yeah, I get it. She's the most immediately recognizable voice, and she's finally brought in a little bit more subtlety so I can like her a little more. But come on, even things out a little bit here. I get that Kimberly Schlottman doesn't exactly have the strongest or most expressive tones, but both Philip Sweet and Jimmy Westbrook are potent and explosive singers in their own right. It couldn't hurt to give them a little bit more to do beyond harmonic backing vocals, and yet, that's a convention that Little Big Town has inexplicably stuck to despite changing up so much else, especially when we pivot to discussions of the instrumentation and a lot of the production. And look, for as much as Jay Joyce has steadily improved as a producer, I will give him credit there. For as much organic blending that Little Big Town are using to create a saturated mix, I'm just increasingly convinced that Jay Joyce is not the right fit for balancing out a lot of this atmosphere. Oh, for certain he gets the gist of it. The blurry blends of guitar and pedal steel against skeletal bass lines and drum progressions matching the vocal harmonies do a pretty impressive job in forming a rich melodic sound that was clearly stealing a few glances to Miranda Lambert's The Weight of These Wings, or maybe the better cuts from Kip Moore's Wild Ones. But like with so much of Jay Joyce's production, you always get the feeling that he doesn't really have the fine touch to add in the grit and the balance to really make the mix feel rich and organic, which would make for some good atmospheric touches into spellbinding ones. He always is a little bit too calculated coming from him, if that makes any sense. Now, that's not saying they don't get close here, but take the example of the lead-off single Better Man. The blurry mandolin textures, they hold the melody well, but imagine how much better that song could sound with consistent organic percussion that didn't feel so rigid or obviously fake, especially right from the start of the song. You know, I'll give Little Big Town credit for blending a lot of these tones better than most mainstream country acts. Free does it with some deeper, rougher guitar grooves. We Went to the Beach does it with some sandy touches and a thicker acoustic line, and Lost in California, it picks up on an oddly hypnotic blend of piano, hazy guitar, and a firm underlying bass that quietly has one of the most enticing hooks on the entire album that, yeah, is kind of spoiled by an outro flourishes that weren't needed, but still it's a good song. And then we get the more rock-inspired tracks, and Jay Joyce does get points for giving songs like Rollin' and especially Night on Our Side some actual groove and muscle. But by the time we get to the final 3 songs on this album that play to much more straightforward, borderline neo-traditional country tones, I'm wondering why Little Big Town just doesn't stick with organic textures, real percussion, and not bother with clumsy touches that they don't need when the melodies are strong enough on their own. There are indeed some pretty damn good hooks here. But of course, Little Big Town have always had an uncanny knack for getting some good hooks. Where they've struggled a lot more is in some of the songwriting, which is probably why they hired some really big heavyweights this time around. And you know what? Let's not mince words. Lori McKenna's well-framed insight and detail has reached the point where you can start to identify her songs almost on instinct thanks to some of the detail, always with the faded, wistful but honest embers of times long past that give her work a consistent emotional weight. Hell, from the themes of being a decent human being to find commitment to unhappy people, you didn't even need to tell me that Lori McKenna wrote it, even if it does feel like a little bit more of a broad version of Humble and Kind. And the mature retrospection, it also translates to the focus on smaller meaning, on free, although Natalie Hemby's touch definitely shows through as well in some of the writing, or even to the reflections on aging and death on Don't Die Young, Don't Get Old. I was surprised that Lori McKenna actually had a credit on Lost in California, but you know what? It does kind of fit her brand of romance and shows a knack for more impressionistic love songs that are pretty, I'll give her that. But what all this reflects is that while Little Big Town can hit real greatness from a lingering breakup ache on When Somebody Stops Loving You, where McKenna's attention to detail and nuance again shines through, that's immediately followed with the guilt of initiating the breakup on the superb title track and the closer courtesy most of TJ Osborne of all people from Brothers Osborne. When they don't have great writers behind them, they can really stumble. I've already talked on Billboard Breakdown how much Taylor Swift's voice comes through on Better Man in probably the worst way possible, with some very questionable word choices implying abuse. One of those cases where vagueness definitely works against you, but then you got songs like Drivin' Around, which just kind of feels clumsy and listless. It doesn't go anywhere. At least we went to the beach to try to tap into the detailed nostalgia instead of just punching the clock like that song did. But there are a few tunes here that almost feel too vague to have a lot of distinct impact, and not in a way that complements the omnipresent haze that runs through a lot of this album. But you know, beyond that, with every single listen to this album, I'm left thinking that it really should be better than it is, because make no mistake, the great songs here are amazingly strong. The title track, Free, Night on Our Side, more for the really great hook, that oddly reminds me a lot of a Cam song like My Mistake, and then we got We Went to the Beach and When Somebody Stops Loving You. They're both solid for a lot of their nuance. Hell, even though Lost in California meanders and really does go on too long in the end, I'm almost inclined to give it a pass thanks to how well it captures that atmosphere and a fantastic hook. But this is not a consistent album, with the other tracks not so much leaning towards bad as they are kind of formless and forgettable, experiments that kind of fizzled out into indistinct haze, or rock touches that just feel incongruous with the rest of the tone. As such, on the strength of some truly great songs, I'm giving this album a light 7 out of 10, and a recommendation for Little Big Town fans, but I'm not sure how much viability this album will have long term, and it'll depend a lot on what singles they pick going forward, because look, there is a lot of potential here. Beyond that, well, if you're curious, it's worth a listen. Yeah, I'd check it out. It's pretty good. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If you guys actually want to get this album, the link down in the description below is for you to buy it. And for your guys' opinions, got the poll up there. Be happy to see where Little Big Town fans fall on this record. My reviews of their material tends to get some mixed responses, so I'm genuinely curious with this. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right here, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week the higher Patreon contributors get to add records to my schedule. And it's been pretty interesting the past couple weeks. You guys really get into it. Beyond that, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.